Welcome into another episode of the Musketeer Report Podcast. Paul Fritschner and Rick Broering with you. Today is Monday, February 12th. Xavier sits at 13-11 overall, 7-6 in the Big East. They are coming off a win over Villanova last Wednesday night, 56-53. Then over the weekend on Saturday afternoon, a loss to Creighton, 78-71 at the Cintas Center. Xavier was trailing by 20 at one point in that game, but came all the way back, had a chance toward the end, trying to cut the deficit down to a one-possession game, just couldn't get over the hump. Xavier's now ranked 42nd in KenPom as we sit here today, 52nd in the net. They're 10 spots away from that at-large cut line, according to Bracket Matrix Rick, and a big week upcoming for the Musketeers going on the road. It's a quad 2 game now after what happened to Seton Hall on Sunday against Villanova. They've dropped down to 76th in the net, which means it is a quad 2 game, but they're right there on the cusp. That'll be in South Orange Wednesday night. Big week for the Musketeers to pick up a road win, but then they go into their bye week, so just the one game this week. We will start with the news out of Xavier, the injury news. The Jerome Hunter Achilles injury that he suffered last Monday in practice. He tore it just in practice on Monday afternoon, right after we recorded the show, probably 2 or 3 hours.
How weird was that? Because we were talking about the future of the front court, talking a lot about him coming back next year and what it meant for him to be back in practice and all of those things. And then within hours, we get that news. I mean, I'm smiling as I'm saying that because it's crazy how that all worked out. But I mean, it just such a terrible, terrible thing for Jerome Hunter.
Yeah, so he had surgery. I was told that he had surgery on Friday. Everything went well. There was no updated timetable for return or anything like that. It's still just at Jerome's pace. However, best he is able to work back from that injury. Nothing was updated after the surgery or anything like that. So we're just working off of whatever Jerome is able to do and however best he is able to come back from that injury. But he did have the surgery on Friday, and now he looks forward to at whatever point he is able to come back, if he is able to come back next season. But I think the biggest question that this leaves us, because we haven't podcasted since his injury, is where this leaves Xavier and how it impacts Xavier with the transfer portal opening up in just about 50 some days, 60 days here. It's right around the corner. The season is coming to an end in the sense of March Madness. It's wild to say, but it's February 12th. And you're starting to think about some of those things that are going to be around the corner looking ahead to next year. So, Rick, in your mind, how does this injury affect it? Because the way that I look at this, it's really intriguing to me to see how this coaching staff is going to handle this injury, because there's so many levels to it. Do you trust that Jerome is going to be able to get back maybe by the start of conference play this season? We've seen a lot of players that have suffered this injury and then they never look the same again in college. I think it's unfair to compare this to Justin Moore's injury, because a lot of people have been saying, well, Justin Moore doesn't look the same this year. What people might be forgetting is that Justin Moore also had a knee injury this year that he's working his way back from too. So it's not apples to apples with Justin Moore.
Well, and Justin Moore looked good last year after he came back from his Achilles injury. So
he did.
He's really the wrong example to use if you're looking for a negative example, for sure. But Paul, the biggest thing in terms of what this means for Xavier, I think, first of all, we'll start with the fact that Jerome plans on coming back from everything we've heard. Sean Miller said in his announcement when he confirmed the next day on Tuesday that he had injured it in practice, he said, we expect him to come back. He plans to come back. So that is everyone's intention. At the same time, we talked about it in last week's show that while you have this element with Zach Freemantle and Jerome Hunter coming back, I don't know how much you can just be reliant upon the fact that they're going to be back for sure. And more importantly, that they're going to be the same guys that you're expecting them to be, or that they've been at different points in their career when they were at their best. And now this just adds another layer to that. And I think what it all adds up to for Xavier is that you're going to have to find some more insurance this year in the offseason. And I don't think they would have entered this offseason without looking for more front court help, especially after what we just witnessed this past week with the front court play against Villanova and Creighton. But this only solidifies that even more, that the options going into next year are, questionable at best. If in terms of a reliability standpoint, I think we all believe that Zach Freemantle and Jerome Hunter can play, but it's just a matter of if they can get back to 100% and stay healthy.
Yeah, it leaves a lot of question marks to try and fill because, like you said, do you plan on them being back and you go full go for it in the Big East season? Do you plan as if they're not going to come back? There's so much, so much minutia to this that I don't really know. This is a really tough spot for this staff.
This whole offseason is really going to be difficult. And the way this is set up with the front court, especially, you have so many bodies. And there is some promise there with the different young guys that you have, but there are a lot of young guys. And I don't know that you can have all of them back on this roster. And you have Zach and Jerome, who seem like really great pieces if they can return to form. But how reliable upon that can you be? And now, I mean, let's face it, you also have the NIL factor to add up in all of this, and those guys are going to demand some NIL money to keep them around. And so you have to factor that in when you're thinking, hey, we want to go out and try to upgrade our talent at this position too. Well, how much money and resources from the NIL perspective can you allocate to your front court? So all of that is going to make it a really interesting offseason. And I will say, Paul, I mean, how we cover this sport has definitely changed, especially in terms of 24/7 sports and what I do at Musketeer Report. I mean, it used to be so much about preps recruiting, and this time of year, we'd be talking about all the high school recruits for 2025 that they're going out to see and that they're bringing on visits and how important that is. And if you're on the message board right now, you'll see that like we're not talking a ton about 2025 recruits. We talked about a visit or they had this past weekend, and we'll get more into that, but even he could reclassify to 2024. And the reason for that is because it's changed so much. You're so much more reliant from year to year upon the transfer portal and what the guys on your own roster are going to do in terms of their decision, that there's just a lot to figure out before you can be looking at high school prospects a year ahead of time. And so I say all that to say, we are going to cover this transfer portal in a different way this year too. I think, but maybe a little bit more live streaming stuff like this, more regular shows to keep up with the day-to-day information that's coming out during transfer portal season. It's really going to be the biggest time of the year, I think, for college basketball going forward.
Rick, I need to plug in my laptop, but while I'm doing that, I got to ask you a question. Just straight up, point blank. If you were this coaching staff heading into this offseason, or even right now knowing what you need, if you were in Sean Miller's shoes, how would you handle the Jerome Hunter injury and what you would want to do going forward with this front court?
Well, I think obviously there are so many different parts to that, not just with the Jerome piece, right? I mean, it all, you got to factor it all together. But in terms of what the Jerome injury means is, I think there's no way that you can go into next year looking at him as a starter for you. And that's no slight at Jerome, but I just don't really believe that he's going to be ready 100% by the start of the season to be a starter, to be playing starter-like minutes for you. So I think it starts with that, is you can't rely on Jerome to be a starter. Maybe he's a piece at some point next year. Maybe he recovers and you get into the middle of the season and he's back to being more of a starter-like player for you. That would be a best-case scenario, in my opinion. I don't see looking at him as a go-to guy early on. So I think that's where I would start with it. You've got to be able to have a starter at that forward spot. Maybe you feel like that's Zach Freemantle and you'll have another center, or maybe your plan is Abu Usman is still going to be your starting center and Zach Freemantle can start at the forward spot for you. But I would feel much more comfortable if you went out and got a bona fide starter for the center position, and then you kind of figured out things from there. I think that's where I would start with this, because in the worst case scenario, I think you can slide down a wing like a Desmond Claude or a Dalen Swain to that forward spot like they've started to do already this year. And I think you can get by with that if you have the right player at the center position. Now, that's much easier said here on February 12th than it is done when we get into the transfer portal when it opens up, because every team in the country, as we saw last offseason, is going to be looking for a talented center, and there just aren't that many of them out there.
All right, let's move on to talking about some bracketology. Xavier splits the week last week, picks up a win against Villanova, which right now, as we sit here, sits as a quad 2 win, and then loses a quad 1 opportunity against Creighton. I mentioned that Xavier's sitting at 52nd in the net right now. The win over Nova, the loss to Creighton, to me, the win obviously builds up some good momentum for you. I don't think the loss to Creighton is some death blow. Losing a quad 1 game is not going to knock you out of the tournament like it would if you lost to DePaul or Georgetown at this point in the season. But what it did do was it eliminated a significant resume building chance for you. And it also dwindled your chances of getting to that magic 18 or 19 win mark that a lot of people have talked about. So now you go into the rest of the season. There are 7 games left in the regular season. 3 of those 7 games, as we sit here, are quad 1 games. Probably going to be 4 if Seton Hall can get their act together. They're right on the outside looking in. But let's just say it's 3. Those quad 1 games would be at Marquette, at Butler, and then home against Marquette. So only one more at the Cintas Center would be a quad 1 opportunity, and that would be against Marquette. What do you think this last week did for Xavier's at-large chances, Rick?
Well, I think you said it pretty much perfectly right there, Paul. It's not so much that was the death blow for your season, but all the margin for error is gone, right? I mean, you have to be at worst 5-2 down the stretch here, which means winning at least one of those quad 1 games you talked about, which, I mean, let's face, like, they probably need to win one of the Marquette games, and also a win like at Marquette would be the signature win that you're looking for. So this all goes together, because I see some people bringing up like, hey, they don't have a great signature win right now. It's like, well, yeah, but if they get to that win total that we're talking about, 18 or 19, you probably are going to get that signature win down the stretch here, whether that be the game at Marquette, or, I mean, I don't know if you look at the game at Butler as a signature win necessarily, but it would be another quad 1 win on the road. So I think that would still be enough. I still look at the 18 number if you want to get in the conversation. As I've been saying all along, I think 19 makes you feel really good. So we're talking about 5-2 or 6-1 down the stretch for this team. And this is like, I know some people are now saying, oh, it's over. They have no chance. They're not going to go 5-2 or 7-1 or 6-1. You may be right. That's what I've been saying this whole time. That's why I've been saying it's like hard to talk about this team's NCAA tournament resume when they're just fighting to keep their head above water. They're not a very consistent team. It is going to be really difficult for them to go 5-2 down the stretch. But that's been the case for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Like, it's been really difficult for a while. They dug themselves a big hole. So I don't see I don't think their chances changed much since last week, in my opinion. It's very much odds are not in their favor. But if they play their best basketball at the right time, it's not out of the question. They could win any of these games down the stretch. They're all winnable for them, except maybe that game at Marquette.
Xavier sits at 13-11, and it really is a shame that if Xavier had just won those 2 bye games and you're sitting here at 15-9, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. It would be a seeding question instead of are you going to get into Dayton question.
That's it. And we knew that at the time. I mean, we said you can't lose 2 bye games at the Cintas Center if you're trying to put together an at-large resume. That just is what it is. I mean, or if you do, then you would have had to like beat Purdue or beat Houston or something like that in the non-conference, which this team just wasn't up to the challenge of doing, and understandably so. So this is where they're at. But like we've said, I mean, if they do catch fire, and like if Quincy Oliveri and Trey Green are hitting shots, or Dalen Swain is playing out of his mind as he continues to build confidence, maybe this team will get on a roll. And in that case, the last 7 games are not incredibly difficult. I mean, the game at Marquette is really the only one that stands out, is like they don't really have a good chance going into that one.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the front court. We've talked about the front court as it relates to next season with Jerome Hunter's injury, but let's talk about the 2024 season. And Sean Miller, after the game against Villanova, ripped into a player worse than maybe I've ever heard a Xavier coach rip into a player before. He called Gitas Namiksha terrible after that game, and I think at one point said that he was wondering if Gitas was playing for Villanova. I mean, he was not mincing words after that game. And then he talked about Abu Usman, the rest of the front court, having problems against Creighton. Needless to say, with the way that Ryan Kalkbrenner played, 12 for 14 from the field, 28 points, dunk after dunk after dunk. Front court did not have a good week.
No, it was brutal. And this has been an issue for this team the entire year, Paul. I mean, even if you go back to the bye games that we were talking about, well, really more so the Oakland game than the Delaware game. The Delaware game was kind of more the backcourt that got torched a bit, but the front court in the Oakland game was terrible. And it's been a struggle really throughout the entire season. I think it's just more glaring when you go up against Creighton and you have a 7-footer and Ryan Kalkbrenner, but you also have their perimeter weapons that they have. And you've got things like Giedis trying to chase guys around screens, which he clearly is not comfortable doing. We've talked about that multiple times during the video breakdowns with Trey Scotty. So he's getting lost on that. And then you're getting bullied inside because your post defense isn't tough enough or strong enough. And if Abu doesn't play well, which he didn't in the Creighton game, this front court is really, really bad defensively. I mean, they really offer no resistance outside of Abu when he's playing his best. And as Sean said, Abu was not good. He just didn't have it in this Creighton game. And so it really left Xavier in a tough spot in terms of the front court defense. Now, I'll be honest, like I'm watching this Villanova tape, after the game, I'm going through some of the clips some of the stuff they ran on offense. And Paul, it's like, I don't know how anyone guards some of the stuff they're doing. When you have the shooters that they have at the forward position and you run that pick and roll with a guy like Kalkbrenner, who's so long that you can just lob it up to at the rim like that. I mean, genuinely, like when they're playing like that, you wonder how they ever lose a game. They look like one of the best teams in the country. And so I think that just kind of tells us, one, where Xavier's talent level is this year. They're definitely below some of these other teams in the Big East. And it's a noticeable difference. And then two, I do think you caught Creighton playing one of their best games of the season. They looked really good in that matchup.
Yeah, they did. I think it's tough to judge on Saturday going up against a team like Creighton, where after the game, Sean Miller talked very highly of Creighton. In fact, I'd say if Sean talked for 10 minutes after that game on Saturday, probably 5 of those 10 minutes were just praising Creighton and how well they played. And look, it's hard to beat a team when they're firing on all cylinders like that. And yeah, Creighton was up 20 and Xavier cut it down and made a run at the end, but they just ran out of time. Xavier at the very end of the game, they ran out of time and they had chances, but going up against Ryan Kalkbrenner time after time after time, it was deja vu all over again. The pick, the roll, the dunk.
Well, and not all of that is like on the front court, right? I know everyone's like pushing the front court, but part of it is like, again, you're worried about getting out to their shooters. So there's no tag on the roller. Sometimes the big man's getting caught in no man's land for sure. We heard Sean talk about that and go off on Sasha during the first game against Creighton. They had one of those inside the huddle moments where they were showing Sean screaming at Sasha for getting stuck in no man's land in his drop coverage. But not all of that is on the front court. Some of it is just on the overall defensive scheme and Xavier's issues there. So I guess the thing about this whole front court situation is it's not getting better this year. They just don't have the talent. I mean, offensively, this group offers you almost nothing. So it really puts a lot of stress on the backcourt, and that's not going to improve. And defensively, I think when Abu is at his best and he stays out of foul trouble, he gives you a chance against a lot of matchups, but Ryan Kalkbrenner isn't one of the best for him, and he definitely didn't play very well. So I don't think it's going to get better this year. I think the only way it gets better is you either upgrade with better talent next year via the transfer portal or recruiting, or guys like Sasha and Lazar, a real offseason in the weight room and a real offseason where they have time to break down the entire system, learn it from ground zero and build up throughout the entire offseason. They could come back as completely different players. So I think that's what you're really looking to as a Xavier fan in terms of how does this get better for next year.
I didn't think Lazar looked terrible on Saturday defensively, at least.
He's making improvements, right? I mean, the problem Lazar has is when he looks bad, he gets like thrown out of bounds or he goes like sprawling and rolling around on the ground or something. He's just completely out of the play and it's so noticeable. If he could just be a little more solid during his bad moments so it's not so glaring and noticeable for everyone in the coaching staff, I feel like he maybe stay in the game a little bit longer sometimes. But I agree with you. The last few games, he has shown a little bit more wherewithal and understanding on the defensive end. And with his length and athleticism, he can give you something on that end because of his physical tools.
So how much do you think, Rick, and we've talked about it a little bit, but how much do you think that this will push Sean Miller towards relying on a smaller lineup, like putting Dalen Swain or Desmond Claude down there at the 4?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of that. I mean, it's clear that Dalen is getting better and better and more confident. The only issue you have there is I know a lot of people are like, well, just play Dalen there pretty much permanently. Well, he's having breakdowns too on the defensive end. He's still missing some things. Now he's making a whole lot more plays for you, and those stand out when he goes and makes a play. But there are still things within the system and like when they're off ball stuff more so, like when he's not guarding the guy one-on-one, when it's off the ball, reads and different screening actions that he's getting lost on when he's chasing guys occasionally. So he's getting better, but it's not all the way there yet where you can just say, let's start Dalen and play him as many minutes as possible at the forward spot.
Yep. All right. Let's move on, talk about Villanova and that in particular, the last possession against Villanova, because boy, was it a disaster for the Wildcats. But I want to ask you, Rick, how much of it was good defense by Xavier versus how much of it was poor execution by Villanova?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of both here, right? And I guess we'll start with the play call, which I should have had the video ready here, but the play call was essentially just you're taking Brendan Hawson, who's a smaller shooter, not the best athlete in the world, kind of trying to run a slip screen action on the backside where he causes a little confusion, and then he runs through an elevator screen off to the right wing. And Xavier knew that was, as soon as like they saw what was coming, they knew you're trying to get Hawes in a three. So you're just sprinting through that, busting up the screen, which Davion McKnight did a good job of, and staying with him so he doesn't get a clean look. That was the initial part of the play. And after that, it completely broke down from there for Villanova. I don't know if they had another action that they're supposed to run off of that. It looked like Eric Dixon was maybe looking for someone else to start coming from the top of the key, and it never happened. And after the game, Kyle Neptune said that there was a second option for the play, though he declined to go into what that actually was. But then from there, you basically just got a two-man game between Hawson, who's not a good creator off the dribble, and Eric Dixon, who is a 6'8" big man, and he can shoot a little bit from the outside, but again, not going to create anything. It really went nowhere. Now, I give Abu Usman a lot of credit because he made a couple of good reads there to stay out and contest any perimeter jumpers, not go with the cutter once he got switched and everything. He realized, hey, they can only hurt us with a three-pointer here. We've really got to stay out on the perimeter and guard the three. And so he had a good read there. It was good defense by Xavier. I don't want to take anything away from Xavier. They understood what was coming. They read it, and they executed well. But, Paul, to not get a shot in that situation, that's about as bad as I've ever seen. 18 seconds left. That's just, it can't happen.
Well, there's so many things that you can do if you're Villanova, and not one of them includes not getting a shot off. I mean, you could drive straight to the basket, which is what I think a lot of people thought they would do. Just go downhill, get to the basket, force Xavier to go to the free throw line, make some free throws, and extend the game. I'm always the proponent that you take the three, but even with 18 seconds left, when the broadcaster constantly says, well, you don't need a three here, you can take the points. You always need the three. I'm here to tell you, you always need the three when you hear the broadcaster say that. But with 18 seconds, that's a lot of time because you can come down. Maybe Xavier misses one free throw. Then you only need two. Maybe you take the three for the win. Instead of just dribbling around and not getting a shot off. And, oh, by the way, they weren't even looking to get a shot off at the end. It's not like Eric Dixon had the ball and he was dribbling and then, with a half a second left, he realized how much time was left and then took a shot that was, a half a second late. You remember Kieran Cantor in the 2018 Big East tournament against Providence. He took a shot that went in, but it was a half a second after the buzzer. Most of the time in this situation, somebody on the court's counting it out. The bench is counting it out, whatever. And I know it's on the road. I know you're not in your home environment where you have the whole crowd counting it out. But still, the bench or somebody on the team needs to be aware enough to say, at least look toward the basket and maybe angle your body so it kind of looks as if you want to throw the ball at the hoop. Do something. But
he was going to reverse it
laterally.
Yeah, he was reversing it back to the top of the key as time expired.
Yeah, don't reverse the ball laterally. So I was taking a video from my angle on the baseline, and when Hawson came off that screen, I thought Xavier was in a good position. And to your point about Abu Usman, I thought he did a fantastic job because you could tell Hawson maybe wanted to try and jump into him to draw a foul, but Abu was just straight up. That would have not worked out for Villanova unless a crazy shot would have gone in. But with about 5 seconds left, with the way that Xavier extended out on Eric Dixon, once he got the ball, you knew he wasn't going to get a shot off because he had no clue how much time was left. He had no idea. And that's the second time in 3 weeks that Xavier did something that they hadn't done defensively throughout the game, whether it was against Georgetown, bringing that second guy to the ball, or now against Villanova, that you get that defensive stop at the end. And in both situations, if you go back and watch the video, Ed Cooley and Kyle Neptune, you can see just the life getting drained out of their face when they realize what's happening and they're powerless to stop it. Except, though, by the way, they weren't powerless to stop it because they still had a timeout left.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of times people are like, oh, call a timeout, call a timeout. It's like, well, you don't know how things are going to play out. It's bang, bang, whatever. But to your point, there's 18 seconds left with this one. You run the initial action for Hassan and it's not there. You know, at that point, the ball is not going to one of your best creators. The play has been blown up. There's nothing happening here. Call the timeout with 8 seconds left. You can still run a full nother set at that point. Like, you still have plenty of time. I don't understand what Kyle Neptune was doing. Now, that being said, he's taking so much heat for this, and rightfully so, because it is like one of those moments that when you lose your job eventually, people point back to. They remember when he didn't even get a shot off in the end of the game against Xavier? Like, that's one of those types of moments. It's a big deal. So I'm not saying he shouldn't be getting a lot of heat for it. But at the same time, he can't take the shot for his players. If you're a ball player, you've been in end of game situations. It's chaotic. It doesn't go ideally. The drawn up play doesn't always work. If you're a player, if you're good enough to be at freaking Villanova on a Division I basketball scholarship, you have to put a shot up in that situation. Yeah. You don't go to reverse the ball back to the top of the key as time expires and act like you've never played in a basketball game before. You're a high major talent. I mean, be a basketball player, man. You got to get a shot up there. I know you're not open, but that just, like, he's taking so much heat for this, and maybe the fact that his players don't understand that they should be taking a shot in that situation. They got to force something up there. Maybe that's on him to some extent too, I guess. I don't know. Maybe like you've got them thinking way too much. I don't know how that happens. Brother,
it could be an air ball. You could throw the ball in the student section. Throw the ball and hit me in the face. Do something that at least gets the ball toward the basket and not east and west.
Yeah, I just like you got to put some of the blame on the players in that situation to not put a shot up at all. You had 18 seconds. I know the play didn't work, but throw something at the backboard and just pray at that point.
Yeah. All right, Justin Moore, only 3 points in this game. 1-3.
And that's part of the situation, right? Because like a lot of time, like, had you told me at the beginning of the year that Villanova is in this situation at Xavier, who was going to be their go-to guy in that play, who would your answer have been to start the year?
Yeah,
Justin Moore, right? 6'5", he can create a little bit, he can shoot, but he is just offering them nothing. What do you have, 4 points in this game?
Three. Hit 1-3. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, he was a complete non-factor, and they just clearly realized that at this point. So it's sad to see, because he was a guy that I thought was going to be an NBA player. And looking at him this year, I mean, maybe he's still recovering. Maybe he'll come out on the other side and he'll play really well when he's in summer league or something with an NBA team. But it just looks like he's completely lost all his powers.
Yeah, it just coming off that knee injury, it's just been too much. Also, I will say, if he's 6'5", I could have been Shaq. I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing here?
What are you going to give him, 6'3"?
I'm 6'3". And I can see over his hair. What are we doing?
Well, when did you go back-to-back with Justin Moore next time X sees Villanova?
All right. Anything else from the one other thing that I think a lot of people talked about, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but the scene after the game got a ton of national attention with Kyle Neptune. The Philly media was blowing him up. He came in, made a statement, didn't take questions, walked out. Twitter started blowing up because it seemed kind of like a miscommunication. Maybe it was partial frustration into that. And then he came back. I've never seen that. I mean, in 8 years of being around the press conferences, you've been around a lot longer than I have. I've never seen a coach come back in 50 minutes later and say, does anybody have any additional questions?
Yeah. So what happens is he was pouting. He knew it didn't go well for him. He immediately came into the media room. No one was even down there yet to answer questions. I guess he gave like a 15-second statement, it sounded like, and then
none of us were there. I mean, I didn't go straight into the room. I talked to a couple of people on the web, but it wasn't like I was waiting around forever. And I saw Adam Baum, who walked in way before I did. I mean, 2 or 3 minutes way before in this situation. And even he said he hadn't seen it, and Kyle was walking out. And it probably was a little bit of frustration built into no Philly media had traveled. So there was nobody. He knew he wasn't going to have to answer questions from, or at least wait around for the Philly media that was making their way down there. So he comes in, makes a statement. Then he went out into the hallway, I think, and maybe answered a question or two out there. I don't know who would have asked him those questions, but I think he did. And then came back in like 50 minutes later and talked to Mike.
Yeah, so the initial part happens. He leaves the press room, and when no one even knows it happened, like we're not even down there. We get told once we get there, like, hey, he's already in and gone. And I'm like, no offense, but that's obviously we just lost in terrible fashion. So I'm kind of being a sore loser move by him. I don't care. It doesn't bother me, but like that's what it was, because you know what the normal protocol is, you know the normal time that these things take. So going in there and being like, oh, no one's here to ask questions, it just must not be a press conference day, we're going to skip it, is like, come on, you know, that's not realistic. We all know what happened there. So, which is fine. It doesn't bother me that I did that. But then afterwards, a few people tweet out that like, hey, we're not going to have any answers here because Kyle Neptune already came and left. So then he starts getting crushed by Villanova Twitter. It's all happening in real time. So he and his SID then barge back into the media room and is like, who needs to talk to us? Who did we not talk to? We're getting crushed on Twitter. And like, he comes back, he talks to Mike Petraglia because he still wanted to ask him questions. I didn't really even care at that point. Like, so like, we're all going to say you should lose your job for that play. We all know what it is. I don't really think your answer isn't going to be that enlightening anyway. So I really didn't care. But yeah, I've never seen a coach come back into the press room like that and answer questions, but it was only because he was getting crushed on Twitter by his own fan base after people said that he wasn't there to answer for it.
Yeah. All right. That's that. I just thought we should address it because it was all over Twitter as soon as the game was over. Let's move into Saturday. JP Macura was in town. He was back. He's actually not playing this season. He's injured. So he's taking the year off because of his injury. He was in town with his family. His daughter, his fiance was there. Everybody was in town for the 2024 Xavier Athletics Hall of Fame induction ceremony, which was on Friday night. I was there. It was a great time being there. Chris Mack was there to give the introductory speeches for both JP and Trayvon. Trayvon's family was there. Trayvon was still over in Italy playing. He couldn't make it back. He did send a pretty funny 8 or 9 minute video message in that they played for everybody. But it was a great night, and I think it illustrated just a lot of the things about JP. I couldn't tell. I was there with my fiance, and I looked at her laughing, and I said, JP's either going to get up there for 40 seconds and say thanks coach, thanks family, thanks Xavier, and move on. But he talked for probably 8 or 9 minutes too about just how much he appreciated the fans, how much he loved playing at Cintas. And he mentioned that multiple times over the weekend. He mentioned that on the podcast. We did that with him, and I thought it was really cool to see him back, see how much he cared. He was crying while he was out on the court with his daughter when he was introduced at halftime of the Creighton game. And congratulations to him. It was a special weekend, and Trayvon as well. Hall of Fame is very deserved for the both of them.
So don't tell us the story, but tease it for us. What was the best story that he gave during the podcast? The Sean Miller.
If you're watching this a lot, we clipped it. I'm gonna tweet it out here in a little bit. It was a Butler story that he told about some of the Butler fans and how they got his phone number before a game. We clipped it. It was an incredible story, and I knew like some details of it because I remember it when it happened, but I didn't remember everything and how it happened. But just the most classic JP Macura story of all time. It's about 90 seconds. We're gonna tweet it out later this afternoon too, but you can go back and watch the whole episode. But I thought too,
Sean Miller. That's the latest Sean Miller podcast episode, by the way, with JP Macura. Yeah. So make sure to check that out.
Yeah. But yeah, for the weekend, I mean, Saturday's game, 12:30, Big Fox, Tim Brando, Robbie Hummel, Hall of Fame induction weekend. It was I don't know what Xavier calls it, but like the salute to service, the Armed Forces Day, and which, by the way, at the Hall of Fame induction, if you haven't read the story, Adam Baum went and wrote that story a couple years ago on Captain Phil Bucklew, who is the captain of Naval Special Warfare, also the founder of the Navy SEALs. That goes hand in hand. But he was a Xavier Hall of Famer, and he was inducted on Friday night as well. And that was a really, really powerful moment of the night. And then 3 representatives from the military were there on Saturday to accept the award on behalf of him. Phil had passed away, so they were there to accept the award on his behalf. a lot of things happening on Saturday afternoon. And I'll be honest, I will say it was a real shame that Xavier wasn't able to get the win on such a special day like that. It just felt like everything was kind of converging toward a momentum shifting Xavier win, with everything going Xavier's way on Saturday as far as the outside noise was concerned and the things surrounding the game. But the atmosphere was incredible. The first 4 minutes of that game where Xavier went up, whatever it was, 14-4, 11-4, whatever it was in the first war of that game, was, to me at least, and I texted this to a couple of people that asked, they said it was coming through on TV, and I got some text saying, is this as good as it sounds on TV? And I said, yeah, to me, that was the best non-shootout atmosphere that I can remember at Cintas in a long, long time. It was a ton of fun, and it was a shame they couldn't get it done.
And I hate the hyperbole with things like that. Like every time there's a new good atmosphere game, everyone's like, oh, that was the best since whatever. It's like, that one really felt like it to me. I thought that place was rocking. It came across on TV. It felt super loud during like going to media timeouts early in the game when things were going well for Xavier. So I thought it was a really cool atmosphere. And like, you lose the game, that stinks. That's unfortunate. And when you have a recruit on campus, like they had a 2025 center from New Zealand, Julius Halefanua.
Sure.
We'll go with
sure.
that. We'll try that.
Sure.
I have not talked to him yet. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. But he was on campus, talented guy, potentially could move to the 2024 class. There are a couple other Big East schools that are really in there with him. We have a lot more information about him on the message board. But when you have a recruit like that on campus, you're trying to impress. You want to try to schedule it for a game where you're going to have an atmosphere like that, obviously. And I don't think you could have gotten a better turnout from that perspective. I mean, the fan base was on fire for that game.
Yeah, it really was. And you're right. Sometimes you get caught in the moment as soon as the game ends and you think, oh, it was such a great game. It was such a great atmosphere. But really on Saturday, I can't remember one that was as good as that, at least from my vantage point. I know sometimes I get a little, I have a little bit of a different view on that because I'm always standing 5 feet in front of the student section. So maybe it always sounds a little louder.
It always sounds loud to you.
Is. Yeah, it always does. But I think that when you look at the crowd, I mean, they were constantly, the lower bowl was on its feet for a lot of the game, and especially once Xavier made their runs. I know being down 20, it's hard to really stay engaged and stay in the game. But yeah, to the fans' credit, I mean, Sean talked about it a lot after the game, and that's always one of the first things that Sean says in a post-game press conference, or whether it's on the podcast or wherever it is, that he knows and appreciates the fans and what they bring to the table in a game like that. But Xavier not able to get it done on Saturday in front of that crowd, but still a couple of chances left at Cintas.
I also think with like atmospheres, when you're like trying to measure that engagement, there's different levels to this. Like there's games where it was loud the entire game and it felt like the fan base was like super engaged since before the game started. And this was one of those, where it was like before the game, everyone came in here with a lot of juice. They felt like this was a huge game for the program. And then there are other games where maybe you don't expect it to be as big of a game. Maybe the crowd didn't come in like that, but then there's those crazy moments and you get those loud roars at different points of the game. And those are like sometimes just as impressive, but it's different,
The one that always sticks out to me, Rick, I don't know if you were at this game, but the East Tennessee State Trayvon game.
Yeah.
Were you there for that?
Yeah, I remember that.
I was still a student when that game happened, and I was working that game from the press box that's all the way up in the top corner. And whenever I would do those games, it would always give me a much different perspective because you're above the crowd and you can see everything from that vantage point. And I just remember, because Xavier was down by 20 in that game, 18, whatever it was in that game, and then it came all the way back to win, and how electric that crowd was coming down the stretch. And it's tough for a bye opponent to be as excited and as thrilled as that crowd was. And those are like the little moments that you think back on where you didn't go into that game expecting anything. You expected to win by 50, and it takes a last-second shot to win.
There's a Georgetown game that's similar during Chris Mack's tenure where they got down big in the first half and then came storming back with like an insane second half run. And it was like, it felt for like maybe 20 minutes straight. The crowd was just screaming at the top of their lungs during that run. And I'll never forget. I was like still on the court at the time, all the or like sitting on the floor, sideline seats where they put the media at that time. And I just remember like, it felt like it was shaky. Like the scores table was shaking at different points of the second half because it was so loud in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So Xavier, I mean, look, the rest of the season, there are still some chances back home. 3 home games left. Home against Providence next Wednesday, the 21st. Home against DePaul, and then home against Marquette. So 2 real marquee games, I would say. And then you have that DePaul game that, by God, you just can't lose. All right. Next up, Xavier Seton Hall, 7 o'clock Wednesday night, CBS Sports Network. Absolute disaster in the Fritschner household. Alta Fiber has pulled the plug on CBS Sports Network. They can't come to an agreement with Paramount. So I have no idea. Wednesday night, I'm already sweating bullets about Wednesday night. Don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to fight through it, as all Warriors do. I will figure out a way to watch this game on Wednesday night.
Godspeed. Burners in the chat. Share your login information for Paul.
Please, somebody. God, find me a way. What are your thoughts on the Pirates after Seton Hall coming off that game yesterday? Oh, my God, Rick. I mean, talk about a response for Villanova. On Sunday afternoon, they beat Seton Hall 80-54 in Philadelphia.
Yeah, so unfortunately, right now, this isn't as a quad 2 game for Xavier. Seton Hall dropped out to 76 in the net, so quad 2 game. They might be able to play their way back in and make that a quad 1 game again for Xavier and make a little bit better opportunity here. But I guess the good news playing against Seton Hall is it's the one team that Xavier matched up really well against, I felt like, in conference play earlier this year. And really, why is that? Because Seton Hall doesn't have a good front court either. So you match up pretty well with them from that perspective. It's going to be talented perimeter guys going against talented perimeter guys. And both teams are desperate right now. They're both right. Seton Hall is probably even closer to that cut line than Xavier is, maybe one of the last teams in or first teams out as things currently sit. Xavier, obviously not the first 4 out or the next 4 out, but probably in the 4 after that group, somewhere between like 12 and 16 maybe ish.
Yep.
So
yep. Xavier and Seton Hall have played 3 times since Sean Miller came back to Xavier. 2 of those 3 times have been 20-point victories or more for Xavier. So it's been a matchup that Xavier has fared well in over the last couple of years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say I'd feel pretty good about this one as a Xavier fan, knowing you need it. But at the same time, I mean, this team playing on the road, it's pretty much anyone's guess how it's going to turn out, right?
Well, and, the other thing, too, tough spots for both Creighton, who hadn't lost 3 straight Big East games since 2019, and they're coming off a terrible, I don't want to say terrible losses in like a resume loss, but like you had an easy chance to win that game at Providence. Devin Carter hits this crazy shot from the logo, goes to overtime, you lose. It was a pink out at Providence, tough to win on the road, I get it. But like Creighton, I don't want to say should have won that game, very easily could have won that game at Providence. They know they don't want to lose 3 in a row. You go on the road, you pick up a quad 1 win at Cintas. Now, Seton Hall, coming off a 26-point loss to Villanova, has a chance to come back home in front of their home fans and right the ship a little bit. That's tough. That's not great spots for Xavier over the last couple of games as far as their opponents go.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So you get a look at the rest of the schedule here. This is from bracketologist.com. Quad 2 at Seton Hall, quad 2 at home against Providence, then quad 1 at Marquette, quad 4 home against DePaul, quad 3 at Georgetown, quad 1 at Butler, quad 1 home against Marquette. That's how they'll finish it off. Like we talked about, need to go 5-2 or 6-1 down the stretch to have a chance to dance, really.
Okay, a couple of things. One's a hypothetical that I'm going to close the show with, but the other thing, just looking at Bracketology, there are a couple of websites. One, if you're watching on YouTube right now, it's just bracketologists.com. That's a great tool. There's also the tool that I always like to throw out, and if I remember, I can put it on the message board here soon. It's just the bball.notnothing.net, and that's what projects the conference tournament standings. And I know a lot of people start like they like to hop in the lab and simulate the games the rest of the way. It just, at this point in the year, people have opportunities to go in there and kill some time. But Rick, I want to throw this. Oh, okay, yeah. So if you're watching on YouTube, Rick's on that website right now. Rick, I want to throw this out to you. I was talking with some friends about this the other day. Now, let me make this very, very clear. There is no world where this would have happened. But we're in the clicks business, and we like to have some fun on this show. So I'm going to throw this hypothetical out to you. This lineup, theoretically, if everybody had come back and everything had worked out, could have happened. Colby Jones, Jack Nunge, Jerome Hunter, Zach Freemantle, Davion McKnight, and Quincy Oliveri. Those 7 guys all on one team. Jack Nunge could have come back. Colby Jones could have come back. Jerome Hunter and Zach Freemantle could have been healthy. Quincy Oliveri and Davion McKnight in the transfer portal. There's no world where that happens. Colby was an NBA player. Jack was, he had spent a long time in college. I'm not saying it would have happened, but they all had eligibility left and could have come back. Yeah. Think about that 7.
The bigger problem there is, do you get Quincy Oliveri for sure if you have Colby Jones coming back and Desmond Claude? And just, you know what I mean? Like,
play my hypothetical, Rick.
I'm willing to, but that's where I go. I mean, yeah, if you have all of those guys on the same roster, my goodness, like, yeah, the offense would not have near the issues that they have operating in the half court. You know, I mean, like, this team basically has to get all of its points by either scoring in transition or somehow manufacturing a 3-point shot for Quincy Oliveri. Occasionally, maybe Desmond Claude can get you to the free throw line or something like that, score the mid-range a little bit. But in the half court, they're so limited with what they can do offensively. If you had that group where you've got Jack Nunge spacing at the top of the key with those high-low actions, you got to worry about Freemantle over the top. You got to worry about him in the short roll. You've got Quincy Oliveri stretching the floor. You've got Colby Jones and Desmond Claude both creating. I mean, you'd have a lot of weapons, but that's why college basketball is what it is. No one's able to keep rosters like that together for the most part.
I didn't even say Des Claude. I didn't even say Des Claude because that was just the one that I was assuming. I was talking about those 7 are the guys that are, that had decisions or, hurt or whatever that you'd throw in there. But yeah, Des Claude too. I mean, there's 8. That's a Final Four team right there.
Yeah, legitimately. I mean, that's no doubt you're looking to go past the second weekend with that group. That is a big time team with Sean Miller coaching them. Unfortunately, that's not the way it went. Sorry, Xavier fans, for torturing you with that.
All right, that's all. I just had to have a little fun there. Rick, any news notes, nuggets here to close the show?
We do have a couple comments here, a couple questions that we might be able to get to. I think we mentioned this from Matt. How much of a difference would it have made had we just won one of those Oakland or Delaware games? Yeah, if you win both, then you feel much better about where you're at. If you win one of them, I think that makes a pretty big difference, Paul. I mean, that honestly, only having one quad 3 loss as opposed to 2, and the fact that they're both, it's just so glaring when you're looking through separation points for these teams that are on the cut line, and you look at Xavier, you see 2 home losses to mid-major teams. Like, it feels like it goes even a bit beyond just the 2 quad 3 losses when you look at it on the resume, right? I mean, how it happened, I feel like that'll be factored in a little bit too.
Yeah, I think for sure. If you win one of those games, you're feeling a whole lot better. If you lose 2, or if you win both of those games, like I said, you're talking about seeding now. You're not talking about making the tournament. You're in the tournament if you win both of those games, no doubt about it. I mean, I'm not saying you're a 5 seed, but you're a 9 seed. You're an 8 or 9 seed, and you're not worrying about Dayton. You're not worrying about the bubble. It's just where you are at this point in the season. You also have to hope that Oakland doesn't drop down to a quad 4 game too. Your Norse didn't help us out on that one the other night, that overtime.
I mean, I've been trying to tell you guys all year, Oakland isn't what you think they are, and Trey Townsend is not a high major player, but you guys won't listen to me. So,
thought we'd made the whole episode. Creighton was only one.
Creighton was only 1.04 points per possession. Outside of dunks, thought the defense was hold its own. Creighton was not giving space on the perimeter, felt the flow offense was stuck, and more sets could have helped. Yeah, I mean, but Troy, that's the point, right? Like, Xavier has no wiggle room because they can't score on offense. So that's why when you're giving up dunk after dunk in the pick and roll, and it feels so hard to guard Creighton, even though you maybe are doing a decent job, that it's brutal, man. It's like it's brutal to go through a year like this where you just don't have the talent level to function efficiently on the offensive end of the half court like you're laying out there, and it puts so much stress on everything else, like your defense and your inability to guard the pick and roll.
Yep. Any other questions?
Noah says, "Tell me what you think about the lineup for next year. Point guard McKnight, shooting guard has to be a transfer portal shooter. Small forward Claude, power forward Freemantle." Center, I believe we need a stretch 5 in the portal like Nunge. Well, I mean, I think that would be a good lineup, but that's the whole conversation here, right? Like, what are you going to do at the shooting guard position in the transfer portal? You got to find a big time player there to match what Quincy Oliveri is giving you this year. And then saying you need a stretch five in the portal like Nungy is great. But the problem is, aren't a lot of Jack Nungies in the transfer portal. And had Jack Nungy actually entered the transfer portal like we know it today, the bidding war for him would have been significant in NIL dollars. So that it's just a little bit different than now as opposed to then, and the way they got Jack Nungy when they got him from Iowa. I don't know that you're going to be able to find guys like that very easily now.
Yep.
All right. Did Sean actually say he wants to get 3 to 4 new guys from Max? Yeah, Max, he did. I actually wrote about that on Musketeer Report. He mentioned it on his coach's show last week or the week before. Someone called in and said, what does it look like for next year in terms of new freshmen? And Sean said, we have one freshman coming in that's already committed in Jonathan Powell. He said there could be as many as 3 or 4 new faces, but he would only look at maybe one more freshman in addition to Powell. So Powell is one freshman, could have 2 freshmen total, meaning one more in addition this offseason, and then definitely 2 or 3 transfers, it sounds like, is in the plans, according to Sean Miller.
Yep. All right.
Paul, anything else there?
Nothing else from me, Rick.
All right. I think that's it.
What do you want to? No, we're not in the predictions business. Wednesday.
we're definitely not in the predictions business. People get upset. People get very upset with predictions, so we will not do that.
All right. Let's get on out of here then. Thanks everybody for listening this week. I hope everybody liked the live. I mean, I hadn't really got a chance to see how many viewers we were pulling here on Twitter and YouTube and everywhere else. But yeah, thanks to everybody for watching, spending the lunch hour with us. If this works, maybe we keep this going here for the next few weeks.
Yeah, appreciate it, everybody. Thanks, Paul.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.